The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony, like any other day. Pete Collins wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked the mining equipment deep in the red dirt of Kepler 442b. The planet was far from Earth, but it felt like home now after 5 years of digging precious metals from its soil. His 8-year-old daughter Emma was at the colony school with the other children, learning about stars and planets while their parents worked to build a better life among those same stars. Jake Morrison sat in his office reviewing the daily reports when the sky changed color. The blue morning light shifted to an odd purple glow that made everyone stop and look up. The mining equipment went silent as workers stepped outside to see what was happening. Large ships appeared in the sky like dark clouds blocking out the sun. They were unlike anything the humans had ever seen before. The ships were smooth and crystal-like, reflecting light in strange ways that hurt to look at directly. Pete dropped his tools and ran toward the colony center where Emma would be. Other parents were doing the same thing, all of them feeling the same cold fear in their stomachs. The ships landed without making any sound, which somehow made everything worse than if they had roared like human spacecraft. Tall figures emerged from the vessels, walking on long, thin legs that moved in ways human legs could not. Their bodies looked like they were made of living crystal, and they had too many eyes that glowed with pale light. The aliens spoke through. Small devices that translated their words into human language. Their voices sounded like wind through broken glass. "We are the Zephyrian Collective," they announced to the gathering crowd of frightened colonists. "We require biological specimens for our computational matrices. Your offspring possess optimal neural plasticity for our purposes." Jake Morrison stepped forward, his hands shaking but his voice steady. "You're talking about our children. You can't just take them. We won't let you." The alien closest to him tilted its crystalline head in a way that suggested confusion rather than understanding. "Your emotional attachment to these specimens is noted but irrelevant. We have calculated the most efficient method of acquisition." Before anyone could react, invisible barriers of energy sprang up around the school building and other areas where children were present. The barriers glowed with the same purple light as the ships. Parents rushed forward and slammed their fists against the energy walls, but nothing could break through. Pete Collins threw himself against the barrier so hard that his hands began to bleed, but the wall remained solid as stone. Inside the energy barriers, 37 children between the ages of 6 and 14 stood frozen with terror. Emma Collins pressed her small hands against the barrier from the inside, trying to reach her father who was just inches away, but might as well have been on another planet. The other children cried and called for their parents, but the aliens paid no attention to their fear. The Zephyrians moved with cold efficiency. They placed metal bands around each child's wrist, bands that glowed with the same purple energy as their ships. "These devices will prevent biological deterioration during transport," the lead alien explained to the desperate parents. "Your specimens will be preserved in optimal condition for neural integration." Dr. Susan Hayes, the colony's medical officer, pushed through the crowd. "Neural integration? What are you planning to do to them?" The alien's multiple eyes focused on her with mechanical precision. "These specimens will become living computational units within our data networks. Their developing neural pathways will enhance our processing capabilities by approximately 37%. The words hit the parents like physical blows. The aliens were talking about using their children as living computers, plugging their young minds into alien machines for purposes the humans could barely understand. The colonists began shouting and demanding the return of their children, but the Zephyrians showed no emotion at all. "Resistance will achieve no positive outcome," the lead alien stated. "Your species lacks the technological capability to oppose the collective. We have analyzed your military capacity and found it insufficient for meaningful resistance." The alien gestured to its companions, who began loading the terrified children onto their ships using beams of purple light that lifted them off the ground. Emma Collins reached desperately for her father one last time before the beam carried her toward the alien vessel. Pete Collins screamed her name and threw himself at the barrier again and again until other colonists had to hold him back to prevent him from seriously injuring himself. All around the colony, similar scenes played out as parents watched helplessly, while their children disappeared into the crystal ships. Before departing, the aliens left behind a large container filled with rare metals and crystals. This compensation represents fair value for the biological resources acquired from this location, the lead alien announced. Your specimens will serve a purpose greater than their original biological imperatives. This transaction benefits the greater efficiency of the galaxy. The ships rose into the purple sky and vanished into the darkness between stars, taking with them 37 human children and leaving behind a colony full of parents whose entire world had just been shattered. Jake Morrison stared at the container of alien materials, then at the empty spaces where the energy barriers had been. The aliens had no idea what they had just done. They had calculated human military capacity and found it wanting, but they had failed to calculate something far more dangerous than weapons or ships. They had failed to understand what happens when you threaten human children. The emergency message from New Haven Colony reached Earth Command in Geneva exactly 14 hours and 37 minutes after the Zephyrian ships disappeared into hyperspace. Admiral Lisa Carter was reviewing routine patrol reports when her aide burst into her office without knocking, something that had never happened in her 23 years of military service. The young officer's face was pale as he handed her the datapad containing Pete Collins' desperate transmission. Admiral Carter read the message 3 times before the words truly sank in. 37 children taken by aliens for use as living computers. Her military training told her to remain calm and follow protocol. But somewhere deeper than training, something ancient and furious began to wake up. She had 2 children of her own back on Earth, safe in their beds, while other human children were trapped in alien ships heading toward an unknown fate. Within 6 hours, every human military base from Mercury to the outer colonies had received the same message. Captain Ryan Walsh was teaching his 8-year-old daughter, Kate, how to pilot a training simulator when the alert came through. He read the report while Kate played with the controls, her innocent laughter a stark contrast to the horror unfolding in his mind. He thought about Emma Collins and the other children, probably scared and alone in alien ships, and his hands began to shake with an anger he had never felt before. The response was immediate and unprecedented. Soldiers who were off duty returned to their bases without being ordered. Civilians with military training began calling their old units asking to be reactivated. Merchant ship captains started converting their cargo vessels into makeshift warships, welding armor, plating to their hulls, and mounting whatever weapons they could find. Nobody had given any orders yet, but across human space, people were preparing for war. Dr. Susan Lee was studying peaceful alien plant life on Proxima Research Station when she heard the news. She had devoted her career to understanding alien biology, hoping to build bridges between species through scientific cooperation. Now she stared at her research notes about Zephyrian cellular structure and began thinking about weaknesses instead of similarities. If the aliens wanted to use human children as computers, she would find ways to make their own biological systems fail. Senator Kevin Martinez was having breakfast with his 3 children when his secure communicator buzzed with the emergency alert. He watched his youngest daughter, Amy, who was the same age as Emma Collins, carefully cutting her toast into small pieces. The sight of his child's concentration on such a simple task filled him with a protective rage that made his vision blur. He kissed his children goodbye and headed for the emergency session of the Human Colonial Assembly, already knowing what he would propose. The assembly hall had never seen anything like the session that followed. Representatives who normally spent weeks debating the smallest details passed emergency resolutions in minutes. The Terran Defense Authorization Act was approved unanimously, giving Admiral Carter unlimited authority to use any means necessary to recover the stolen children. The Human Protection Protocol established that any attack on human civilians, especially children, would be considered an attack on all humanity. Ambassador Rachel Ford was in the middle of delicate trade negotiations with the Centauri Trading Consortium when she received orders to withdraw from all non-essential diplomatic activities. The alien traders were confused by her sudden change in demeanor. One moment she had been discussing grain exports. The next, she was informing them that humanity was temporarily suspending all peaceful activities until their children were returned. The aliens asked what children she meant, and her explanation left them staring at her in shock. News of the kidnapping spread through human space faster than official communications. Social media networks, interstellar news feeds, and personal messages carried the story to every human settlement. On Mars, factory workers stopped production lines to hold vigils for the missing children. On the orbital stations around Jupiter, miners donated their entire paychecks to fund rescue operations. On the farming worlds of the Outer Rim, families who had never seen war began teaching their children how to hide and how to fight. The aliens monitoring human communications were puzzled by what they called an irrational response. The Zephyrians had expected some protests, perhaps economic sanctions or diplomatic complaints. Instead, they watched human military units mobilizing without central coordination, as if driven by some instinct their logical minds could not comprehend. They calculated that humans would make cost-benefit analyses about the value of 37 individuals versus the risk of war with a superior alien civilization. They were wrong about everything. Humans did not calculate the worth of their children in numbers or resources. They did not weigh the costs of war against the value of young lives. When someone threatened human children, the entire species reacted like a single organism, protecting its young. Every parent saw their own child in Emma Collins's terrified face. Every human imagined their own family torn apart by alien logic that treated children like resources to be harvested. Captain Daniel Foster was commanding a routine patrol near the Wolf 359 system when he received new orders to report to Admiral Carter immediately. His ship, the Retribution, was a heavy cruiser designed for fighting space pirates and defending trade routes. Now, Chief Engineer Maria Santos was working around the clock to upgrade their weapon systems beyond safe parameters. When Foster asked about the risks of pushing the ship so hard, Santos looked at him with tired eyes and said her nephew had been in that school on New Haven. By the time Admiral Carter convened her emergency staff meeting, reports were coming in from across human space. The response was unlike anything in human military history. Veterans were coming out of retirement, civilians were volunteering for military service, and entire planetary governments were offering their resources for the rescue mission. The normally cautious bureaucrats were demanding immediate action, and the military officers who usually counseled patience were the ones pushing for the fastest possible response. Dr. Alex Chen had been working on cybernetic research when the news broke. Within hours, he had redirected his entire team toward developing weapons specifically designed to cripple Zephyrian computer networks. If the aliens wanted to use human children as living computers, he would show them what happened when computers fought back. His virus programs would not just disable their systems but force them to see images of the children they had stolen, making it impossible to ignore what they had done. The Zephyrians continued to monitor human communications, but their understanding of human psychology was fundamentally flawed. They saw the massive military mobilization and assumed it was typical territorial behavior scaled up for interstellar conflict. They failed to understand that they had triggered something far more dangerous than human nationalism or aggression. They had awakened the protective instincts of an entire species, and those instincts did not follow the logical calculations that governed Zephyrian society. The Wolf 359 system had never seen so many human ships in one place. Within 72 hours of the kidnapping, over 300 vessels had assembled at the coordinates Admiral Carter had designated as the staging point. Military cruisers floated alongside converted cargo haulers that now bristled with hastily mounted weapons. Private yachts equipped with military-grade shields shared space with massive freight ships that had been turned into mobile weapons platforms by crews working without sleep. Captain Daniel Foster stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the impossible fleet take shape around them. Ships continued to arrive every few hours, their crews reporting for duty with a determination he had never seen before. Chief Engineer Maria Santos had not left the engine room for 2 days, pushing their fusion reactors beyond every safety limit in the manual. When Foster expressed concern about the risks, she simply pointed to a picture of her nephew that she had taped to her control panel. Dr. Alex Chen worked in a cramped laboratory aboard the science vessel Discovery, surrounded by screens showing Zephyrian network architectures. His team had been analyzing every piece of alien technology humans had ever encountered, looking for weaknesses in their computer systems. The virus he was developing would not just crash their networks, but would force every Zephyrian screen to display images of the stolen children. He wanted to make sure they could not ignore what they had done, even for a moment. Lieutenant Commander Nancy Price led the reconnaissance teams that were tracking the Zephyrian ships through hyperspace. The aliens' logical, predictable flight patterns made them easier to follow than they realized. Human scouts had found traces of their ion signatures at 3 different star systems, each one bringing them closer to Zephyrian space. Price and her teams were mapping the aliens' route while staying far enough away to avoid detection. Admiral Carter coordinated the massive operation from her flagship, the carrier Valiant. The bridge hummed with activity as officers from dozens of different services worked together with a unity that would have taken months to achieve under normal circumstances. The shared purpose of rescuing the children had broken down every barrier between military branches, planetary governments, and private organizations. Everyone understood that this was not about politics or territory. This was about bringing human children home. The fleet was preparing to depart when an unexpected visitor requested permission to come aboard. Ambassador Kethvar of the Altonian Federation arrived in a small diplomatic vessel, asking for an urgent meeting with Admiral Carter. The Altonians were an old and wise species that had observed galactic politics for thousands of years, and they rarely involved themselves in conflicts between younger civilizations. Kethvar was an insectoid being with compound eyes and delicate limbs that moved with careful precision. His translator conveyed obvious distress as he spoke to Admiral Carter in her private briefing room. "Admiral, you must understand the nature of your enemy before you proceed. The Zephyrians are not evil in the way humans understand evil. They are simply incapable of comprehending emotional bonds between individuals." Carter listened carefully as the alien explained Zephyrian society. They were a collective species where all offspring belonged to the community rather than individual parents. Their decisions were based purely on logical calculations of benefit and efficiency. Taking human children to use as computer components seemed no different to them than harvesting any other biological resource. They had calculated human military strength and determined that resistance would be minimal and short-lived. "They believe they are dealing with a territorial dispute," Kethvar continued. "They expect you to negotiate for the return of some children in exchange for resources or territory. They do not understand that you will fight to recover every single child, regardless of cost." The ambassador's compound eyes reflected the lights of the bridge as he added, "In my species' long history, we have never seen anything like the human response to threats against offspring." Admiral Carter's voice was calm, but her eyes were cold as winter space when she replied, "Ambassador, the Zephyrians are about to receive an education they will never forget. Every human child belongs to all of humanity. We do not negotiate with kidnappers, and we do not compromise when our children are threatened." The final ships arrived as Carter was speaking with the alien ambassador. The fleet now numbered over 400 vessels of every size and type, from massive battleships to small fighters whose pilots had volunteered for missions they might not survive. Every ship was crewed by humans who understood exactly what they were fighting for. Many of the crew members had children of their own, and those who did not had decided that all human children were worth protecting. Dr. Susan Lee worked aboard the medical ship Hippocrates, preparing treatment facilities for the rescued children. While studying everything known about Zephyrian biology, she had found weaknesses in their crystalline cellular structure that could be exploited, but she hoped the children could be recovered without needing to use such weapons. Her primary focus was on understanding how to safely disconnect human nervous systems from alien computer networks without causing permanent damage. The fleet's departure was unlike anything in human military history. There were no speeches or ceremonies, no flags or music. Admiral Carter simply gave the order to move out, and 400 ships turned toward Zephyrian space with the quiet determination of parents going to rescue their children. They traveled in tight formations that could provide mutual support, but also in patterns that would allow them to spread out quickly when they reached their destination. Captain Ryan Walsh commanded a squadron of fast attack ships that would form the advance guard of the rescue mission. His crews were volunteers from across human space, many of them parents who had left their own children behind to help rescue others. They understood the risks they were taking, but they also understood that some things were more important than personal safety. The journey to Zephyrian space would take several days, even at maximum hyperspace velocity. During the trip, the human crews trained constantly, practicing boarding operations and rescue procedures. They studied the layouts of Zephyrian ships and facilities, memorizing every detail that might help them reach the children faster. Every person in the fleet knew that time was critical, that the longer the children remained connected to alien computer systems, the greater the risk of permanent psychological damage. As the fleet traveled deeper into space, reports came in from human scouts who had been monitoring Zephyrian communications. The aliens were discussing the approaching human forces with what their translators interpreted as confusion rather than concern. They were calculating odds and analyzing human military capabilities, but they showed no signs of understanding why humans would risk so much for 37 individuals. That fundamental misunderstanding would prove to be their greatest weakness. The Zephyrians had prepared for a conventional military conflict based on logical, strategic objectives. They were not prepared for an enemy that fought with the fury of parents defending their young, guided by tactical brilliance but driven by emotions that their logical minds could never comprehend. High Coordinator Zithkal stood in the central command chamber of the Zephyrian home fleet, watching displays that showed information his logical mind was struggling to process. The human response was completely outside their calculated parameters. Their computer models had predicted minimal resistance, perhaps a few diplomatic protests or small military actions that could be easily countered with superior technology. Instead, their long-range sensors were tracking over 400 human vessels moving in coordinated formations toward Zephyrian space. The crystalline being's multiple eyes focused on different data streams simultaneously, analyzing the approaching human fleet from every angle. The ships were moving in patterns that suggested tactical knowledge far beyond what the Zephyrians had expected from such a young species. Even more concerning, their deep space monitoring stations in the outer systems had begun going silent one by one, suggesting that human scout forces were already operating in Zephyrian territory. Junior Coordinator Velthar entered the command chamber carrying data tablets filled with cultural analysis reports. Unlike most Zephyrians, Velthar specialized in studying alien civilizations, trying to understand the illogical behaviors that seemed to drive other species. "High Coordinator," Velthar said, "I have reviewed all available data on human social structures, and I believe we have made a critical error in our calculations." Zithkal turned several eyes toward the junior coordinator while keeping others focused on the tactical displays. "Explain the nature of this error," he commanded, in the precise tones that all Zephyrians used for official communications. Velthar activated a holographic display showing human family structures and child-rearing practices. Humans do not treat offspring as communal resources the way our species does. They form intense emotional bonds with individual young that override logical cost-benefit calculations. The High Coordinator processed this information but found it difficult to understand. In Zephyrian society, all offspring were raised by the collective for the benefit of the species as a whole. Individual attachment to specific young was considered inefficient and potentially harmful to optimal resource allocation. The idea that humans would risk their entire military force to recover a small number of individuals seemed impossibly irrational. The first confirmation of human capabilities came when the monitoring station in the Vega system suddenly stopped transmitting. Commander Tony Blake led the human assault team that captured the facility with surgical precision. The Zephyrian defenders were overwhelmed not by superior numbers or technology, but by tactical brilliance combined with an intensity of purpose they had never encountered. The humans did not just attack the station, they systematically dismantled its defenses while taking prisoners for interrogation. Blake's interrogation of the captured Zephyrians was professional, but terrifying in its focused determination. He did not use torture or violence, but his relentless questioning about the location and condition of the children broke down their resistance through sheer persistence. "Where are the children?" he asked over and over, his voice never rising but carrying an emotional weight that the logical aliens found overwhelming. Dr. Alex Chen's cyber warfare virus had begun spreading through Zephyrian computer networks at the same time as the physical attacks. The aliens' interconnected systems, designed for maximum efficiency and information sharing, became a critical vulnerability when the virus began propagating through their networks. The malicious code did not just disrupt their operations, it forced every screen in their civilization to display images of the captured human children. The psychological impact on Zephyrian society was profound and unexpected. For a species that relied on logic and efficiency, being forced to constantly see the faces of frightened human children created a form of cognitive dissonance they had never experienced. Their computers became unreliable, their communications networks showed the children instead of data, and their entire technological infrastructure began reflecting the emotional weight of what they had done. On the Zephyrian homeworld, civilian, populations began experiencing something their species had no name for: guilt. The images of crying human children appeared on every screen, in every data display, and in every communication channel. The virus had been designed to be impossible to remove without completely rebuilding their computer systems, ensuring that the Zephyrians could not ignore the consequences of their actions. Velthar desperately tried to explain the scope of their mistake to the High Command, but the rigid hierarchy of Zephyrian society moved slowly when dealing with unprecedented situations. "The humans do not view this as a resource dispute," Velthar reported during an emergency council session. "They consider the taking of their young to be an attack on their entire species. This is not a rational response by our standards, but it is completely predictable by theirs." The council members listened to the report with growing confusion. They had analyzed human military capabilities and found them inferior to Zephyrian technology in most areas. Their ships were slower, their weapons less efficient, and their numbers smaller than the collective's main fleet. The logical conclusion was that humans would recognize their disadvantage and negotiate for the return of some children in exchange for valuable resources. Instead, intelligence reports showed that humans were mobilizing their entire civilization for war. Merchant vessels were being converted into warships, civilian populations were volunteering for military service, and their normally divided political systems were working together with unprecedented unity. The scope of the human response was far beyond anything the Zephyrians had calculated as possible. More monitoring stations fell to human attacks as the rescue fleet moved deeper into Zephyrian space. Each assault was conducted with the same professional efficiency and emotional intensity that had characterized the first attack. The humans showed no interest in conquest or territorial gain. They simply wanted their children back and were willing to dismantle the entire Zephyrian civilization to achieve that goal. High Coordinator Zithkal began to understand that they were facing an enemy that operated by completely different rules than any species the collective had encountered before. The humans were not fighting for resources, territory, or strategic advantage. They were fighting for something the Zephyrians had no equivalent for in their own society: the emotional bonds between parents and children. The realization that they had fundamentally misunderstood human psychology came too late to prevent the approaching conflict. The human fleet was less than 2 days away from the core Zephyrian systems, and their advance forces were already dismantling the outer defenses. The collective's military commanders were preparing for a conventional war based on logical, strategic objectives, but they were about to face an enemy driven by emotions they could not comprehend. As reports of human advances continued to arrive, Zithkal experienced something unknown to the Zephyrian species: fear. Not the logical caution that guided their normal decision-making, but a deep emotional terror at the thought of facing an enemy that would not be deterred by cost-benefit calculations or superior technology. The humans were coming for their children, and nothing in Zephyrian logic could predict or counter the fury of parents whose young had been threatened. The High Coordinator sent urgent messages to the military fleets, ordering them to prepare for an enemy that fought by rules the collective did not understand. But the Zephyrian command structure was designed for logical decision-making and efficient resource allocation, not for responding to the emotional warfare that humanity was about to unleash upon them. The human fleet arrived at the Zephyrian core systems like a storm of righteous fury wrapped in tactical precision. Admiral Carter divided her massive force into 3 coordinated groups, each with a specific mission that would bring maximum pressure on the alien civilization. The main siege fleet surrounded the Zephyrian homeworld, cutting off all space traffic and communications. Rapid strike teams hit military installations throughout the system, systematically dismantling the aliens' ability to coordinate their defense. The Specialized Rescue Task Force, led by Captain Walsh, prepared for the most dangerous mission of all. The rescue team had spent days studying the layout of the Zephyrian data facility, where intelligence reports indicated the children were being held. The complex was a massive crystalline structure that served as the central processing center for the collective's computer networks. Somewhere inside that alien maze, 37 human children were connected to machines that were using their developing minds as living processors for incomprehensible alien calculations. Captain Ryan Walsh felt his hands shake slightly as he checked his equipment one final time. His assault team consisted of volunteers from across human space, many of them parents who had left their own children behind to help rescue these. They understood the risks they were taking, but they also understood that some things were more important than personal safety. Every person on the team had memorized the names and faces of all 37 children, turning the rescue mission into something deeply personal. Dr. Susan Lee accompanied the rescue team, carrying specialized medical equipment designed to safely disconnect human nervous systems from alien computer networks. Her research into Zephyrian biology had revealed the aliens' crystalline cellular structure could be disrupted by specific electromagnetic frequencies, but she hoped they could complete the rescue without needing to use such weapons. Her primary concern was preventing permanent neurological damage to the children during the disconnection process. The assault began with Dr. Chen's cyber warfare virus reaching full activation across the Zephyrian networks. Every screen, every display, every communication device in the alien civilization suddenly showed nothing but images of the captured children. The virus had grown and evolved during its time in their systems, becoming more sophisticated and impossible to remove. Zephyrian technicians found that any attempt to delete the virus simply created more copies that spread faster through their interconnected networks. While the aliens struggled with their compromised computer systems, Walsh's rescue team penetrated the data facility using information extracted from captured Zephyrian personnel. The alien guards were shocked by human combat effectiveness, fighting with desperate fury, but maintaining tactical discipline that their logical minds could not comprehend. Where Zephyrians fought with calculated precision and measured responses, humans fought with terrifying intensity, guided by professional military training. The facility's interior was a nightmare of organic technology and crystalline architecture. Cables that pulsed with purple energy snaked through corridors lined with processing nodes that hummed with alien computations. The rescue team followed scanner readings that led them deeper into the structure, past laboratories where Zephyrian scientists worked frantically to understand what was happening to their civilization. They found the children in a vast chamber, filled with neural interface pods arranged in precise geometric patterns. Each pod contained a human child connected to the alien computer network through cables attached to their heads and spines. The children were conscious, but trapped in a waking nightmare, their minds forced to process data streams that human brains were never designed to handle. 8-year-old Emma Collins was connected to a massive computational array, her young brain being used to calculate hyperspace navigation routes for the entire Zephyrian fleet. Dr. Lee worked frantically to disconnect the children safely while Captain Walsh's team held off Zephyrian security forces. The alien guards seemed more confused than aggressive, as if they could not understand why humans would risk so much for such a small number of individuals. Some of them actually tried to communicate during the firefight, asking through their translators why humans were willing to die for children who were not their own genetic offspring. Pete Collins had insisted on joining the rescue mission despite having no military training. He fought his way to his daughter's pod with a determination that impressed even veteran soldiers. When he saw Emma connected to the alien machinery, his grief and rage gave way to careful tenderness as he helped Dr. Lee remove the neural interface cables from his daughter's small body. Emma opened her eyes and whispered, "Daddy," in a voice hoarse from days of forced silence. One by one, the children were freed from their technological prison. Some were unconscious, others were awake, but confused by the ordeal they had endured. All of them showed signs of psychological trauma that would take time and care to heal. The rescue team worked with professional efficiency, but also with the gentle care that came from knowing these children represented the future of their species. As the evacuation proceeded, the Zephyrian High Command finally grasped the full scope of their error. High Coordinator Zithkal watched their outer colonies fall to human forces that showed no interest in conquest or territorial gain. The humans were systematically dismantling Zephyrian military infrastructure while making it clear that their only objective was to ensure that no alien species would ever again consider threatening human children. The coordinator sent a desperate transmission to Admiral Carter's flagship as the last children were being evacuated from the data facility. "We acknowledge our error in judgment," the message stated in the precise language of Zephyrian diplomacy. "We will return your offspring and offer appropriate compensation for any inconvenience caused. Your response is disproportionate to the magnitude of the offense committed." Admiral Carter's reply became legendary across the galaxy and was recorded in the diplomatic archives of every major civilization. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of an entire species' protective fury as she responded to the alien plea. "Coordinator, you fundamentally misunderstand the situation. This is not about proportion or compensation. This is about making sure that in 1,000 years, when some alien civilization considers harming human children, they will remember what happened to the last species that tried." The rescue fleet departed Zephyrian space with all 37. Children safely recovered, but the human siege forces remained in position around the alien homeworld. The message was clear. The collective's ability to threaten human children had been permanently removed, and their civilization would be restructured to ensure it could never pose such a threat again. The Zephyrians had learned too late that some lines should never be crossed, especially when those lines were drawn by a species whose protective instincts were stronger than any logical calculation. As the rescued children received medical treatment aboard human ships, they began the long process of recovering from their ordeal. Emma Collins held her father's hand while Dr. Lee checked her neural activity for signs of damage. The other children clung to their parents or to the volunteers who had risked everything to bring them home. They had been through something no child should ever experience, but they were alive and safe and surrounded by humans who would never let them be threatened again. 6 months after the rescue mission, the galaxy had settled into a new reality that no alien civilization could ignore. The Zephyrian collective no longer existed as a galactic power, their once mighty empire reduced to their homeworld and a handful of closely monitored colonies. Their interstellar infrastructure had been systematically dismantled by human forces who showed the same methodical precision they had used in the rescue operation. The aliens survived, but their ability to threaten anyone beyond their own solar system had been permanently removed. On New Haven Colony, life had slowly returned to something resembling normal, though everyone understood that normal meant something different now. The memorial garden established for the children who had survived. The kidnapping had become a gathering place where families came to remember how close they had come to losing everything. Jake Morrison still served as colony administrator, but he noticed that human space felt different now, more unified and purposeful than it had ever been before. Emma Collins celebrated her 9th birthday in her father's mining office, surrounded by drawings she had made of spaceships and stars and families holding hands under alien suns. The trauma of her experience showed in her nightmares and occasional moments of fear, but she was healing with the patient love of her father and the entire colony community. When Pete asked her what she was drawing in her latest picture, she smiled and said it showed all the places where kids were safe now. Dr. Susan Lee had established a new research facility dedicated to what she called protective xenobiology, the study of alien species specifically to identify potential threats to human children and civilians. Her work was funded by voluntary contributions from across human space, with donations coming from families who wanted to ensure that no other children would face what the New Haven kids had endured. Her research teams worked closely with military planners to develop early warning systems that could detect hostile alien activities before they posed a threat. The galactic community had taken careful notice of humanity's response to the kidnapping. At the regular session of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Rachel Ford addressed representatives from 47 different alien species with a message that had been crafted to be absolutely clear about humanity's position. We seek peace, trade, and cooperation with all civilizations, she stated in the universal translator that carried her words to beings of every description. However, we have one principle that is completely non-negotiable. Human children are absolutely untouchable. The response from alien ambassadors was unanimous agreement, but their reasons for agreeing varied significantly. Some species understood the protective instincts that drove human behavior because they shared similar bonds with their own offspring. Others agreed simply because they had witnessed what happened to civilizations that threatened human children and wanted no part of such a fate. Ambassador Kethvar of the Altonian Federation later explained to a colleague that humans had accomplished something remarkable by channeling their protective fury with such precision that it sent a clear message without unnecessary destruction. Captain Ryan Walsh, now promoted to Admiral, oversaw the establishment of the Child Protection Fleet, a specialized force dedicated to preventing incidents like the New Haven kidnapping from ever happening again. His ships patrolled the borders of human space and maintained rapid response capabilities that could reach any threatened colony within hours. The motto inscribed on every vessel in his fleet read simply, "No negotiation, no compromise, no mercy." The fleet served both as a deterrent and as a symbol of humanity's commitment to protecting their most vulnerable citizens. Alien species that encountered the Child Protection Fleet quickly learned that humans took the safety of their young more seriously than territorial disputes, trade agreements, or diplomatic protocols. The sight of human warships bearing that motto became a reminder throughout the galaxy of what happened when someone crossed the line that humanity had drawn around their children. Dr. Alex Chen continued his work in cybernetic warfare, but now, his research focused on defensive systems rather than offensive viruses. He had seen how quickly his weapons could spread through alien computer networks, and he wanted to ensure that human systems could never be compromised in the same way. His team developed security protocols that became standard throughout human space, protecting everything from military communications to school databases. On the former Zephyrian homeworld, the surviving aliens struggled to rebuild their society, with a completely different understanding of their place in the galaxy. High Coordinator Zithkal had been replaced by a council that included specialists in alien psychology, beings who understood that logical calculations alone were insufficient for dealing with other species. They studied human protective instincts, not to exploit them, but to ensure they would never again trigger such a devastating response. The children who had been rescued continued their recovery with the support of counselors, medical professionals, and their families. Some of them had lasting effects from their time connected to alien computer networks, experiencing occasional episodes where they could solve complex mathematical problems that should have been beyond their abilities. Dr. Lee worked with each child individually to help them understand and control these residual effects while ensuring their psychological healing remained the primary focus. Pete Collins had become something of a spokesman for families affected by alien threats, traveling to other colonies to speak about the importance of early warning systems and emergency preparedness. He never spoke about revenge or hatred toward the Zephyrians, focusing instead on the love that had motivated an entire species to risk everything for 37 children. His message was simple. Human children belonged to all humanity, and humanity would always come for them. The diplomatic archives of every major alien civilization now contained detailed studies of human protective behaviors, with particular emphasis on the consequences of threatening human offspring. Military academies throughout the galaxy taught courses on human psychology that emphasized one critical principle: never, under any circumstances, harm or threaten human children. The consequences were described as absolute and unavoidable. HFYs. The anniversary of the kidnapping approached. New Haven Colony prepared for a celebration that would honor both the children who had survived and the thousands of humans who had risked everything to bring them home. The event would be broadcast throughout human space and to any alien civilizations that cared to watch. The message would be clear. Humanity remembered what had happened, they remembered who had helped, and they remembered the price that had been paid for threatening their children. Emma Collins stood in the memorial garden holding her father's hand, looking up at the stars where she knew other human families were living and working and raising their children in safety. She understood now that she and the other kids were part of something bigger than themselves, part of a story that had changed how the entire galaxy thought about humanity. The stars looked different to her now, not as distant points of light, but as places where human children could grow up safe because everyone in the universe knew what happened to those who threatened them.